Have you ever had a gut feeling so strong it made you sick? A physical warning that the world as you knew it was about to end, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe that evil could touch your life? Have you ever watched the person you love most walk out a door thinking you'd see them tomorrow, only to realize later that you were watching a ghost walk away? We all think we know our friends. We think we know the people we share our coffee with, the people we complain about our spouses to, the people who hold our secrets. But what if I told you that even the closest friendships have trap doors, dark little basements where secrets rot until they explode? I'm going to tell you about the night my life split into two pieces, before Martha vanished and the hell that came after. And I need you to listen closely, because the clues were there right from the start. I just was too blind to see them. And by the time I did, the crosshairs were already on my back. It started on a Tuesday, of all days, a Tuesday that felt heavy with rain and that oppressive humidity that makes your skin stick to your clothes, the kind of weather that makes people irritable and keeps them inside, which is why the diner was almost empty when I met Martha. We had been best friends for 40 years, since we were girls with skin knees and bad haircuts, and we had survived marriages, divorces, the death of parents, and the empty nest syndrome. But looking back now, I realized there was a shadow over her that night that I mistook for fatigue. She was looking at her phone under the table, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird, and when I asked her if she wanted her usual cherry pie, she flinched, actually flinched, like I had shouted at her. That should have been my first hook, my first sign that the woman sitting across from me wasn't just tired, she was hunted. She leaned in, her voice dropped to that whisper you use in church or at funerals, and she said, "I found something, Sarah. I found something that could burn this whole town down." And the way she said it, with this tremor in her lower lip, it sent a cold spike right down my spine. I laughed it off. God help me, I laughed it off, because Martha was always dramatic, always reading those mystery novels, and I told her to eat her pie and stop digging into other people's business. And that is the regret that wakes me up at 3 a.m. every single night. The knowledge that if I had just listened, if I had just grabbed her hand and said, "Tell me everything," she might still be here today. She didn't eat the pie. She just pushed it around the plate, destroying it with her fork. And she kept checking the window, watching the headlights sweep across the wet pavement of the parking lot. She told me she was investigating someone dangerously close to both of us. And I remember scanning her face, looking for a sign of a joke, but her eyes were dead serious, hard as flint. She said, "If anything happens to me, check the old place." And I didn't know what she meant. I didn't ask because I was scared, honestly scared by the intensity radiating off her, so I just nodded, like a fool. We walked out to our cars under the flickering orange street lamp, the rain sizzling on the asphalt, and she hugged me so hard it knocked the wind out of me, holding on for a beat too long, breathing in the scent of my perfume like she was trying to memorize it. I watched her get into her sedan, I watched her taillights fade into the mist, and I drove home, thinking about my grocery list, thinking about the laundry I had to fold, completely unaware that I had just become the central figure in a tragedy. The next morning, the silence was deafening. Usually, my phone buzzes at 8 a.m. with a meme or a complaint about the weather from her, but the screen stayed black. I called at 9, straight to voicemail. I called at 10, and the knot in my stomach started to tighten, pulling tight like a noose. By noon, I drove to her house, and that's when the fear really set in, because her car was in the driveway, her front door was unlocked, and her purse that she never, ever went anywhere without, was sitting on the kitchen counter next to a cup of cold coffee that had a layer of mold starting to form, like time had just stopped in that house. The police arrived with their sirens off, quiet and efficient, and at first they were kind, treating me like the worried friend, offering me water, asking me when I last saw her. But then the shift happened, and if you've never been on the wrong side of a police interrogation, pray you never are, because the air in the room changes, the temperature drops, and suddenly you aren't a grieving friend. You're a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. They asked me about the diner. They asked me if we argued. They asked me about money, about jealousy, and I could feel the net tightening. You were the last person to see her alive, the detective said, a young man with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and no patience for my tears. And he let that sentence hang in the air, heavy and accusing. The town, our small, tight-knit community where everyone waved on Sunday mornings, turned on me overnight. I'd walk into the grocery store and conversations would stop, heads would turn, and I could hear the whispers. The, "That's her." The, "I heard they fought over money." The malicious rumors that spread like wildfire in dry grass. I became a pariah in my own life, isolated, terrified, and grieving, unable to mourn my best friend because I was too busy trying to prove I didn't kill her. But fear is a powerful motivator, and anger is even stronger. I realized about 2 weeks in, sitting in my living room with the blinds drawn, that no one was looking for Martha. They were just looking for a way to pin it on me and close the case. If I wanted to save my life, if I wanted to find out what happened to the woman who knew all my secrets, I had to do what she asked. I had to become the detective she was trying to be. I remembered her words at the diner, "Check the old place." And for days I racked my brain, thinking of old restaurants we liked, old parks, but nothing made sense until I remembered the treehouse. It sounds childish, I know, but when we were 12, we built a rickety platform in the woods behind her parents' old property, a place that had been sold years ago and now was just overgrown scrubland. It was a long shot, a desperate, crazy hope, but I drove out there at dusk, parking a mile away and hiking through the thorny underbrush, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The structure was rotting, dangerous, but I climbed up, the wood groaning under my weight, and there, tucked inside a rusted tin box we used to keep comics in, was a plastic baggie taped to the underside of a bench. Inside was a flash drive and a single key. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it, and as I shoved it into my pocket, I heard a twig snap below me. I froze. It wasn't the sound of a deer or a squirrel. It was the heavy, deliberate crunch of a boot on dry leaves. I peered through the cracks in the rotting wood, the twilight making everything gray and shadowy, and I saw a figure standing at the base of the tree, just standing there, looking up. They didn't have a flashlight. They were just a silhouette in a dark coat, waiting. I stopped breathing. I literally held my breath until my lungs burned, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that they wouldn't climb up. After what felt like an eternity, the figure turned and walked away, melting back into the darkness. But the message was clear. I wasn't the only one looking for Martha's secrets, and now I was in the game. I waited an hour before I dared to climb down, scratching my arms on the bark, running back to my car with tears streaming down my face, realizing that Martha hadn't just stumbled onto a secret, she had stumbled onto a war, and she had just drafted me as her soldier. When I got home, I locked every door, checked every window, and pulled the curtains so tight not a sliver of light could escape. I plugged the flash drive into my old laptop, the one I keep offline mostly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't documents, it wasn't bank statements, it was photos. Dozens of photos taken from inside a car, photos of people meeting in parking lots, photos of money changing hands. And the people in the photos, I knew them. I knew them from church, I knew them from the PTA, I knew them from the damn grocery store. But the last photo, the one time-stamped the day she died, was of a car I recognized instantly. It was a silver sedan, a car that belonged to someone I had had over for dinner, someone who had held my hand at the funeral service for my husband years ago. It was the sheriff's car. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I couldn't go to the police because the police were the ones she was investigating. I was trapped in a cage with the lions, and I was holding the only piece of meat they wanted. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with a kitchen knife on the coffee table, jumping at every creak of the house settling. I knew I had to be smart. I had to be colder than I ever thought I could be. The key found in the tin box was small, silver, like a filing cabinet key or a safety deposit box key. I needed to find out what it opened, but I couldn't move freely anymore. I had seen the shadow in the woods. I knew I was being watched. The next day, I decided to play the part they expected. The grieving, confused, helpless old woman. I went to the pharmacy, I bought milk, I walked with a stoop, I let them see me crying. But inside, my mind was racing, calculating. Martha had said the secret involved someone close to both of us. If the sheriff was involved, who else? Who was the we she was terrified of? I started looking at my neighbors differently, wondering who was making the phone calls, who was watching my house. The rehook here is that I realized I couldn't trust my phone. If Martha had been investigating a conspiracy this big, they would have tapped her lines, and probably mine, the second she went missing. I bought a burner phone at a gas station 3 towns over, paying cash, wearing a hat and sunglasses like a criminal. I felt ridiculous, but then I remembered Martha's empty eyes at the diner, and the feeling of ridiculousness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I texted the only number I found on the flash drive, a text file named simply, "If I Die." The number had no name. I typed, "I have the key." I didn't expect an answer. I expected nothing, but 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed in my hand, startling me so bad I dropped it. The text back was one word, a location, the pier, midnight, come alone. I knew it was a trap. I knew it in my bones. But what choice did I have? If I stayed home, they'd come for me eventually. If I went, maybe, just maybe, I'd find the truth. Driving to the pier that night was the longest drive of my life. The fog was rolling in off the water, thick as cotton, obscuring the road, making the world feel small and claustrophobic. I parked the car and walked out onto the wooden planks, the sound of the water lapping against the pilings sounding like whispered threats. The pier was deserted, just a few seagulls crying out in the dark. I waited. 10 minutes, 20. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my arthritis ache and reminding me that I wasn't a hero in a movie. I was a 60-year-old woman in a coat that wasn't warm enough. Then footsteps. Not the heavy crunch of boots this time, but the click-clack of heels. I turned around, expecting a stranger, expecting a monster, but the woman walking out of the fog wasn't a stranger. It was Martha's sister, the one who lived in the city, the one who hadn't spoken to Martha in 10 years. She looked at me, her face pale and drawn, and said, "You shouldn't have come, Sarah. Now they know you know." Have you ever stared at a stranger's face and seen the ghost of someone you loved staring back at you? Have you ever realized that the family you thought was broken was actually bound together by secrets so dangerous they couldn't risk being in the same room? We tell ourselves that distance is caused by anger, by grudges, by petty fights over money or pride, but sometimes distance is a shield. Sometimes the people who leave are the ones trying to protect the people who stay. Standing on that freezing pier, with the fog swirling around my ankles like smoke, looking into the terrified eyes of Martha's sister, Elena, I realized that the narrative I had built in my head of a drifting apart, of a sister who didn't care, was a lie. Elena wasn't there to grieve. She was there to finish what Martha started. And as I unlocked my car door for her, my hands shaking so hard I scratched the paint, I realized I had just let the war into my passenger seat. We didn't speak for the first 10 miles. I drove on autopilot, checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every pair of headlights that appeared behind us felt like a judgment, a pursuit. Finally, Elena broke the silence, her voice cracking with the same exhaustion I felt in my own bones. She told me that she and Martha hadn't been estranged for 10 years. They had been working together for 5. Martha was the eyes on the ground, the beloved local who heard everything at the beauty parlor and the grocery store, and Elena was the researcher in the city, connecting the dots. It's not just the sheriff, Sarah. The sheriff is just the dog they keep on the porch. The people inside the house, they own everything. The land, the bank, the council. She turned to me and her next words stopped my heart cold. They own the nursing home where your mother died, Sarah. And they own the land your husband sold right before his heart attack. The road blurred in front of me. This wasn't just corruption. This was a cancer that had been eating my life for years, and I had been thanking them for the treatment. We pulled into a motley, run-down motel 3 towns over, a place where people go when they don't want to be found. The room smelled of stale smoke and lemon cleaner, a scent that will forever remind me of fear. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and explained the key. It didn't open a safety deposit box. That would be too obvious, too easy for the sheriff to access with a warrant. It opened a storage locker in an old industrial park on the other side of the county, a locker rented under a fake name that Martha had maintained for 3 years. The evidence isn't on the flash drive, she said, rubbing her temples. The drive was just the bait to see if you were brave enough to contact me. The real proof, the ledgers, the recordings, the original deeds, is in that locker. We barely slept. Every car door slamming outside made us jump. I lay there, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, realizing that my comfortable, quiet life was gone. I was a 60-year-old fugitive in a polyester bedspread, and the only thing keeping me going was a burning, white-hot rage. They took Martha. They tricked my husband, and they thought they could scare me into silence. They forgot that old women have nothing left to lose. The next morning broke gray and weeping with drizzle. We drove to the storage facility, a maze of corrugated metal and concrete. The key slid into the lock of 402 with a satisfying heavy click. The door rolled up with a screech that sounded like a scream in the quiet morning. Inside, it wasn't piled with furniture or boxes. There was just a single filing cabinet and a table with a tape recorder. Elena went straight for the cabinet, her fingers flying through the folders, but I was drawn to the recorder. There was a cassette tape inside, labeled simply For Sarah. I pressed play. Martha's voice filled the small, dusty space, sounding so alive, so normal, that I had to grab the table to keep from falling. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady but sad. "If you're listening to this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I tried to keep you out, but you're the only one I trust to finish it. You need to look at the file marked Project Horizon. And Sarah, don't trust the pastor. Whatever you do, don't go to the church." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than the world. The pastor? Reverend Miller? The man who baptized my grandchildren? The man who sat with me in the hospital waiting room? It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Elena handed me the Project Horizon file. It was thick, heavy with the weight of greed. I opened it and saw maps. Maps of our town, but redrawn. They were planning to bulldoze the historic district, the park, the low-income housing on the east side, my neighborhood, to build a massive private distribution center and luxury condos. But that wasn't the crime. The crime was how they were acquiring the land. I saw death certificates attached to property deeds. My neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, who died in his sleep last year, his deed was transferred the day before he died. My cousin, who died in a car accident, her land was signed over 2 days later. They weren't just buying land, they were clearing the board. They were killing the elderly, the vulnerable, the people no one would look too closely at. And they were doing it under the guise of natural causes and accidents. And the pastor? The pastor was the one counseling these people, the one handling their estates, the one guiding their shaking hands to the signature line. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. Martha hadn't just uncovered a scam, she had uncovered a slaughterhouse. "We have to go," Elena said, her voice urgent. "We have the proof. We need to get this to the FBI field office in the city. We can't trust anyone local." We gathered the files, shoved them into trash bags to hide them, and ran back to the car. But as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine didn't catch. It just clicked.
A dead silence. I tried again. Click. Elena grabbed my arm, her grip bruising. "Look," she whispered. I looked up. At the end of the row of storage units, a black SUV was idling. The windows were tinted, but I could see the silhouette of the driver. And then the passenger door opened. Reverend Miller stepped out. He was wearing his collar, looking for all the world that he was making a house call, except he was holding a tire iron. He smiled, a sad, benevolent smile that chilled my blood. "Sarah," he called out, his voice echoing off the metal doors. "We just want to talk." Martha was confused. She was sick. "We just want to help you understand." I locked the doors. It was a futile gesture, I know, against a tire iron and 2 men, but it was instinct. "He disabled the car," I whispered to Elena. "They knew we were coming." Elena was digging in her purse, pulling out a canister of pepper spray, her hands shaking. "The back fence. There's a hole in the chain link behind Unit 405. Martha told me about it." We didn't wait. We scrambled out of the car on the passenger side, away from the pastor, and ran. I heard the pastor shout, his voice losing that gentle cadence, turning into a bark of command. "Get them! Don't let them leave with the papers!" We ran through the rain, slipping on the wet concrete, clutching the trash bags full of evidence like they were gold bullion. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, splashing in the puddles, gaining ground. I'm 60 years old. I have bad knees and a heart condition, but terror is a hell of a drug. I vaulted over a pile of old tires, my breath tearing at my throat like jagged glass. We found the hole in the fence, a jagged tear in the metal, and Elena shoved me through first. My coat caught on the wire, tearing, but I pulled free, tumbling down a muddy embankment into the woods behind the facility. We lay there in the mud, gasping for air, listening to the men cursing on the other side of the fence. "They went into the woods," the pastor yelled. "Call the sheriff. Tell him we have a code red. Tell him to bring the dogs." The dogs. The realization hit me then that this wasn't going to be a legal battle. This was a hunt. We were the foxes, and they were bringing the hounds. We had to move. But where? We were miles from the city, in the woods, with no car, soaked to the bone, carrying evidence that half the town would kill to destroy. Then I remembered something. A hunting cabin. My husband's old hunting cabin. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't on any deed, because he built it illegally on public land 40 years ago. It was 5 miles through the woods. "I know a place," I whispered to Elena, pulling her up. "But we have to be quiet. If they hear us, we're dead." As we started to trek deeper into the dripping, dark forest, I looked back one last time. Through the trees, I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up to the storage lot, lights flashing blue and red against the gray sky. The law, the church, and the money were all united against us. All we had was the truth, and right now the truth felt very heavy and very fragile in my hands. The woods were not silent. They were screaming with the storm. The wind howled through the pines, a sound that masked our desperate, stumbling footsteps as we dragged ourselves toward the only sanctuary I had left. Have you ever felt the forest watching you? Not with malice, but with a cold, ancient indifference. That night, the woods felt like a judge, weighing our survival against the sins of the men chasing us. Elena was faltering, her Chinese shoes sliding in the mud, her breathing ragged, but I grabbed her hand, channeling a strength I didn't know I possessed, the strength of a woman defending her home, her memories, and her dead friend. We reached the cabin just as the first bark of a tracking dog echoed through the ravine, a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a small, rough-hewn structure, camouflaged by 40 years of overgrowth, and as we burst through the door and slammed the heavy oak bar into place, I collapsed against the wood, shaking uncontrollably. We were trapped in a box, and the wolves were scratching at the door. We didn't have much time. I knew the sheriff. I knew he was a hunter. He would circle the perimeter, cut off escape routes, and then squeeze. I lit a kerosene lamp, the dim yellow light casting long, dancing shadows that looked like ghosts. "What do we do?" Elena said, her eyes wide with panic. "They have guns. We have paper." She was right. We couldn't shoot our way out. But as I looked around the cabin, at the desk-covered shelves where my husband used to keep his ham radio, a crazy, desperate plan began to form. The radio was old, a relic from the 80s, but my husband had maintained it obsessively. It ran on a marine battery. I scrambled to the corner, brushing away cobwebs, and flipped the switch. Static. Beautiful white noise. "We don't need to shoot them," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "We just need to make sure the world hears the shot." I handed Alina the files. "Read them. When I tell you to, you start reading names, dates, and amounts into this microphone. We're going to broadcast their secrets on every frequency I can find." The pounding on the door came 10 minutes later. It wasn't the police knock. It was the heavy thud of a boot. "Sarah." The sheriff's voice was distorted by the wind, but the menace was clear. "Open up. Don't make this messy. You're trespassing on state land. We can end this right now." I didn't answer. I was tuning the dial, searching for a clear channel, sweat dripping down my nose. Then a different voice. The pastor. "Sarah, please, think of your family. Think of your grandchildren. Do you want them to grow up knowing their grandmother died a criminal? We can protect them. We can protect you. Just give us the papers." That was the hook, the threat veiled as charity. It made my blood boil so hot it burned away the fear. I keyed the mic. I found a channel used by long-haul truckers on the interstate 10 miles away. "I'm listening, Reverend," I said into the radio, hoping he could hear me through the thin walls. "Tell me why. Tell me why Martha had to die." I signaled Elena. She nodded, terrified, holding the Project Horizon file. Outside, the pastor left, his sound devoid of any humor. "Martha didn't have to die. She chose to interfere. Progress requires sacrifice. This town is dying. The mill closed. The young people are leaving. We secured a future, a $1 billion contract that would save everyone, and she wanted to ruin it because of a few old deeds, because of a few sick old people who were going to die anyway? I gave them peace. I gave them a legacy, and you want to destroy that for what? Morality? Morality doesn't pave roads. Morality doesn't build hospitals." "Read," I mouthed to Alina. She leaned into the mic, her voice shaking at first, then gaining strength. "Project Horizon, illegal land seizure. Victim, Arthur Henderson. Date of death, August 4th. Deed transfer, August 3rd. Victim, Mary Alice Young." She kept reading. I turned the game up on the radio. Outside, the pastor was still ranting, unaware that his confession was being beamed out into the night, picked up by truckers, by late-night radio enthusiasts, potentially by the state patrol monitoring emergency bands. "Open this door," the sheriff roared, and a bullet splintered the wood frame near my head. I screamed, covering the mic, but I didn't stop broadcasting. "They're shooting!" I yelled into the radio. "This is Sarah Miller. I'm at the old cabin near Miller's Creek. The sheriff and Pastor Jenkins are shooting at us. They killed Martha." The door shuddered under another boom. The wood was cracking. I looked at Elena. We were huddled under the heavy oak table, clutching each other, the microphone dangling between us. We had played our card. Now we just had to survive the hand. The sheriff fired again, blowing the lock mechanism apart. The door swung open, letting in a gust of wet, freezing wind and the silhouette of the two men. The pastor stepped in, his face twisted in a snarl, raising a handgun I had never seen him carry in church. "It ends now," he spat. But before he could pull the trigger, a sound cut through the storm. Not thunder, but a siren. Then another, and another, a cacophony of wailing emerging from the logging road. The radio. The truckers. Someone had heard it. Someone had called it in.
The sheriff froze, his head snapping toward the noise. "State troopers," he whispered, the color draining from his face. "That's not local backup." The pastor looked at me, then at the gun, and for a second I thought he would kill us anyway out of spite. But the cowardice that allows a man to prey on the elderly is not the kind of courage that stands and fights. He dropped the gun. He dropped it and sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands, not in prayer, but in defeat. I didn't move until the blue lights flooded the cabin, blinding us. I didn't move until a state trooper and a rain slicker stepped through the broken door, weapon drawn, shouting for the men to get on the ground. Only when the handcuffs clicked, that distinct metallic finality, did I let out the breath I had been holding for 3 days. But if you think that was the end, if you think the credits rolled and I walked off into the sunset,
you haven't been paying attention to how these small towns work. The handcuffs were just the beginning of a different kind of nightmare, a slow, bureaucratic torture that hurt almost as much as the fear of death. We were taken to the station, not as heroes, but as suspects in a crime scene that no one understood yet. I sat in an interrogation room for 12 hours, still in my muddy clothes, shivering under a thin blanket, while state detectives, strangers with cold eyes, picked apart my story. They played the tapes back to me, the pastor's voice confessing to murder, and I had to watch their faces change from skepticism to horror. But outside those walls, the town was waking up to a shattered reality, and denial is a powerful, dangerous thing. When I was finally released, stepping out into the harsh morning light, I didn't see relief on the faces of my neighbors. I saw anger. I saw betrayal. Not at the pastor, but at me. You have to understand, Reverend Jenkins wasn't just a priest. He was the pillar that held up the sky for half the people in our valley. He baptized their babies. He buried their parents. He organized the food drives. To them, I wasn't the whistleblower. I was the woman who tore down the temple. In the weeks leading up to the trial, my car was keyed. Liar was spray painted on my garage door. I'd walk down the aisle at the grocery store and the silence would spread like a ripple in a stagnant pond, followed by aggressive whispers. He was trying to save the town, they said. He was bringing jobs. She ruined it. It's a terrifying thing to realize that people would rather accept a comfortable lie than a horrific truth. They wanted the jobs Project Horizon promised so badly that they were willing to overlook the bodies buried in the foundation. I became a prisoner in my own home, not by the sheriff this time, but by the community I had tried to save. The trial was the final knife twist. It dragged on for 18 agonizing months. I had to sit in the front row and watch as they exhumed the bodies of my friends, Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, people I had played bridge with. The forensic evidence was damning. Traces of arsenic were found in the bone marrow, consistent with a tonic the pastor had personally delivered to the sick. You would think that would be enough to turn the tide, but when Jenkins took the stand, he didn't cry for forgiveness. He looked right at me, his eyes clear and unrepentant, and said, "I was a shepherd culling the weak to save the flock. I did God's math." A chill went through that courtroom that I still feel in my bones today. He wasn't insane. He was perfectly, terrifyingly rational. He believed that sacrificing the elderly to secure the economic future of the town was a holy act. And the terrifying part? When he was led away, sentenced to life without parole, half the gallery stood up and wept for him. It's been 5 years now. The Project Horizon deal collapsed, of course. No investor wants to build a distribution center on land seized through murder. The town didn't get the jobs. The mill is still closed. The main street is half empty. The windows boarded up like blind eyes. The nursing home where my mother died was shut down, a monument to greed rotting in the rain. Elena went back to the city. She couldn't handle the ghosts. But I stayed. I stayed because this is my home and because someone has to remember. I visit Martha's grave every Tuesday. I bring 2 slices of cherry pie and I sit on the damp grass and tell her about the quiet. It's a lonely life being the keeper of the truth. The people who hated me have mostly moved away or passed on, leaving behind a silence that hangs heavy over the valley. I want to leave you with this question, the one that keeps me up at night staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark. We all say we want justice. We all say we want to know what's really going on, but justice is a demolition crew. It tears down the structures we rely on. It exposes the rot we were happily ignoring. I saved my life, and I vindicated Martha, but I destroyed my community. I took away their hope, false as it was. If you knew that the secret buried in your backyard would cost you your friends, your peace, and the very soul of your town, would you still dig it up, or would you let the grass grow over it and just walk away? Because I'm telling you, once you pick up that shovel and strike the earth, the sound rings forever. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you're still here, drop a number 1 in the comments so I know you made it. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like and subscribe for more true life confessions. I've added 2 listener favorites on the screen if you'd like to keep going. See you in the next one.